All right, let's talk about a car you've probably seen 1,000 times, but maybe never really thought about. The Hyundai Getz. You know, it's pretty much the definition of a sensible, everyday hatchback. But what if I told you this little car was actually one of the most important cars of its time? Yeah, I know. Let's get into it.
So, that's the big question we're asking today. And I can already hear you thinking, the most important car? Seriously, it's a Getz? But stick with me here, because its story is about so much more than just getting from A to B. It's really a story about how one company's ambition completely changed the game for budget cars forever.
So here's our roadmap. First, we'll look at how it fit into Hyundai's master plan. Then, we'll dig into what made it so incredibly practical. We'll pop the hood and see what was going on in there. We'll also face the criticisms head-on. You know, the dull part. And finally, we'll ask the big question. Should you actually buy one today?
Okay, so you have to understand, the Getz wasn't just another model for Hyundai. This was their world car. It was designed in Germany with one goal in mind, to take on the giants like Ford and Volkswagen, right in their own backyard in Europe. This little car was basically Hyundai planting a flag and saying, hey, we're serious now. And its journey lasted for the better part of a decade. It kicked off in 2002, showed it was safe in 2004. But the really key moment, that was the 2005 facelift. That's when it got a sharper look, a much nicer interior, and crucially, a better lineup of engines that kept it competitive for years. So how did this little game changer actually convince people to buy it? Well, this is where we get to the absolute heart of why the Getz sold so well. It wasn't about being fast. It wasn't about being stylish. It was about being almost ridiculously practical and sensible. This number right here, 5, was Hyundai's secret weapon. They offered a 5-year unlimited mileage warranty. Think about that. Back in the early 2000s, this was absolutely unheard of. It was this huge shot of confidence, telling buyers, look, we know our cars are reliable, and we'll back them up. For anyone buying on a budget, that was everything.
And here's another number that tells the story. 977. That's how many liters of space you had in the back with the seats down. I mean, that's enormous for a car this size. But the really clever bit was how it worked. The seat cushions would flip forward, and then the backrests would fold down, creating this perfectly flat, massive cargo area. It was basically a tiny van.
So when you put it all together, you got more standard equipment than the competition, it was cheap to run, it had all that space, and you had the peace of mind of that warranty. It's no surprise that car magazines at the time would often pick the Getz as the winner in group tests. It might not have been the most exciting car, but on paper, it just made too much sense to ignore.
All right, time to get a little more technical. We've talked about why people bought it, so now let's talk about what was actually powering it. And this is where you can really see the car's philosophy in action. The focus was all on being reliable and economical, not on raw performance.
Now, after the facelift, the petrol engine lineup was pretty simple. You had the 1.1 liter, which, let's be honest, was just for getting around town. It was slow, but it was cheap. The 1.4 was really the sweet spot for most people, a good all-rounder. But, you know, that 1.6 liter, with a 0 to 62 time under 10 seconds, it actually made the little Getz feel surprisingly zippy. But the real star of the show, the hidden gem in the lineup, was the diesel engine. That 1.5 liter, especially the 108 horsepower version, was brilliant. It had 240 newton-meters of torque, and in a car this small and light, that made it feel genuinely punchy, especially when you needed to overtake someone. It was somehow both the performance option and the economy option. And the secret sauce that made that diesel so good was this little piece of tech, the VGT, or Variable Geometry Turbocharger. Basically, it let the turbo act small and responsive when you were just cruising around town, so you didn't get that annoying delay. But then, when you put your foot down, it would act like a big, powerful turbo. For a so-called budget car, that was pretty advanced stuff. Okay, so far it sounds amazing, right? But no car is perfect, and to get the Jensen to that incredible price point, Hyundai definitely had to make some compromises. So now we have to flip the coin and look at the reasons why, car enthusiasts weren't exactly lining up to buy one. And really, this slide says it all.
The Ford Fiesta from that same era was and still is legendary for being an absolute blast to drive. The Getz, on the other hand, was not. It was safe, it was comfortable, it was predictable. Which, to be fair, is what most of its buyers wanted. But was it exciting? No, not a chance. It was an appliance to get you somewhere, not an experience.
And those compromises became really obvious as soon as you got it up to speed. It was pretty noisy on the highway with lots of road and wind noise. The gear change felt a bit vague and sloppy. In the interior, well, it was a sea of hard, scratchy plastics. It was clearly built to last a long time, not to feel premium. This is where you could really feel where the money was saved.
So, let's pull all this together. On one hand, you've got incredible value, amazing practicality. On the other, it's not very exciting and it lacks refinement. So, where does that leave the Hyundai Getz today as a used car? Is it still a smart choice?
You know, this quote really just nails it. If you're looking for a fun weekend toy or something to impress your friends, this is not your car. But if your main goal is to find dependable, practical, cheap-to-run transportation, the Getz is still one of the best choices out there. Its biggest strengths, reliability, and value never go out of style.
Now, if you are thinking about buying one, here are the big things to look for. And the good news is, most of its common problems are cheap and easy to fix. That sloppy gear change, usually just some worn-out plastic bushes. Listen for squealing belts when you start it up, and definitely check the wheel arches and sills for any rust. And like with any used car, a full service history is gold.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought here. The Getz was never the fastest car. It was never the most stylish or the most fun. But it was honest, it was reliable, it was practical, and it did its job incredibly well day in and day out without any fuss. It was, in every single way, good enough. And you know, in a world that's always chasing perfection, maybe there's a special kind of genius in that.